This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy.
I am opposing a social order in which it is possible for one man to amass a fortune while millions of men and women who work all the days of their lives secure barely enough for a wretched existence. This order of things cannot always endure.
Marxism teaches us that in the capitalist mode of production, it is workers who produce commodities. But social reproduction theory asks the question that if workers produce commodities, who produces the worker?
For the left, and loud, unpopular front. Oh, hello. This is Ben Yudishin with Unpopular Front. It's like a news bureau now, right? Yeah, representing. It is currently, I don't know when this episode's going to be out. I probably shouldn't actually say. It's been an interesting week to get to really see the underbelly of, I hate to do this sort of right before the midterms and, we're all supposed to be unified. But, man, liberals showed their ass to us this week in a lot of ways, and it was not good for the left. Well, maybe it's good for us because they look like fools, but I don't want that, really. I'm not an accelerationist. So, I'm trying to, there's like 3 examples I can think of sort of how, let's say, sort of mainstream ruling class liberals kind of fucked up. The biggest one, and probably most obvious one, and the one that is a source of hilarity and also deep problematic, both politics and also just problematic, understanding of what these terms and concepts are, is Elizabeth Warren's weird DNA test thing that happened earlier on Monday. If you don't know, I really don't know how you would know, but obviously there's been this long-term thing with her in Elizabeth Warren's family history, as in a lot of family histories. In my wife's family history, there's this narrative of her grandmother being part native, and sort of it's a aspect of American culture and history that, fucking goes back to the settling of European and eventually other places for some more liberatory reasons than others, let's say, of the land that we now call North America, really just all of the Americas, around indigenous heritage. And this week, Elizabeth Warren decided, or really probably her staff, I'm definitely gonna hold it against her that it looks like she might have hired some people who maybe worked on a few notable losing campaigns, but the big one from 2016, if you know what I mean. So I don't know. Maybe they're just sort of out of touch, They're just not as woke as I am and all my friends. We just know so much more. But Elizabeth Warren thought it would be a good idea to use one of those DNA tests, those 23andMe, those sort of the modern calipers of the 21st century, to prove that she has, quote, native, quote, DNA, quotes, quote, quote, quote. I mean, I don't want to sound too like postmodern, but I mean, that does not mean anything. Not that I don't believe that she has those versions of the haplogroup in her DNA, but it's a weird game to start playing, because this is firmly, without question, the realm of the right. The right loves this kind of stuff. You like go on YouTube and you're like me and you just want to learn about the goddamn Byzantine Empire, and you just want to learn some stuff because like you never learned it, because you like never took like a medieval European history class or any, you know. And then like all the, you know, obviously the YouTube algorithm is just like a reactionary's wet dream. It just sort of feeds you all the worst stuff some of the times. Autoplay is dangerous. That's all I'm saying. And, you know, when you do that, you'll then come upon these weird sort of historiographies of race and haplogroups and all this stuff. And it's all made to justify these like non-existent concepts. Like these are purely fictions of the idea of like whiteness and Western civilization and all of these different ideas, which there are plenty of sources you could go find. I found the ContraPoints video about quote unquote the West was very illuminating. But when Elizabeth Warren chose to play this game as a way to own the Cheeto in chief, because that's basically what this all came down to. She didn't have to play the DNA game for any reason to show solidarity with Native communities, or even to like, I don't know, like reach out to the Cherokee Nation and like have a bill or some, you know, like introduce some kind of policy, or just do like some video or something and like make this a signature issue. It turned instead into not a question of sort of what is the status and relationship of Native people to power in 2018, or the historical context for sort of why Native people are so, you know, isolated and pushed off to the edges of society, and, you know, the hundreds of years of conquest and colonization. No, instead it was, I'm going to get this DNA test and I'm going to get a number on it that's going to say, Trump, gotcha. See, you can call me Pocahontas because I goddamn are Pocahontas. Like, obviously that's not what she's saying, but it kind of is what she's saying. It's not good. And I understand the idea that this is a way to sort of be politically expedient, because if you do it now, it won't be as big of an issue, but she could have done it so much better. And to me, as someone who would probably support her, especially if Bernie wasn't running, of all the prospective candidates, it pisses me off. It's really frustrating. Because when we play these games and we go on the right wing's turf, we're buying into some of these concepts. We're trying to, by their own logic, them. But all that's actually happening is we're becoming a part of their own ideology. We are making real what doesn't have to be real. You know, race is not a biological concept. There's no white gene or Asian gene or African gene. You know, even I watched a YouTube video that actually wasn't really racist, that was just going through sort of, if you're going to look through these genes, that explained that what we in America, from our racial ideology, we see people from Africa and then we're like, they're black. But the genetic diversity of someone, like the difference in what someone is in East Africa versus someone in West Africa, is more diverse and more different than someone from South Asia and someone from France. So there's this, it's, when we try to understand things like DNA, but we're still accepting the reactionary and non-scientific constructs of race, you're just sort of giving ammunition to the right. And that's what Elizabeth Warren did. Hopefully we can get past this. Hopefully, though, this just means like Bernie's going to run and she's not going to run or something, because it was not good. And if we're going to have any kind of even social democratic politics, we can't do this kind of shit. Maybe this is why, like, just liberals cannot save us. Maybe this is why we have to take over the Democratic Party. Maybe this is why we need a whole different generation and approach towards leadership. Because there are so many opportunities that are missed and are turned into a chance to try to win a very particular worldview's idea of what politics is, and are missing the fact that there is power that they can exercise through the people. By highlighting regular people's struggles, you can bring people in, people who are not normally a part of the political conversation. But instead, again, it's about 23 and fucking me and haplogroups and calipers and race science. We have a guest on today. Her name is Lindsey Weedston. She's a writer here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And she's a writer on feminism and politics and is a freelance writer. So you should hire her. She's pretty cool. We are going to talk to her about MRAs and South Park and the Proud Boys. And I hope everyone enjoys our conversation with Lindsey Weedston. I've been reaching out a lot to like other writers, especially who I find on Medium. So I don't know how much you, because I looked at your blog and you have so much stuff. So for some reason, I just assumed you were like me, and basically Medium was your main blogging place, but you got a ton. So that's where I discovered you, anyways. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So I'm Ben.
Hey Ben. I'm
Hello.
Lindsey.
This is Lindsey. Hello, everybody. Thanks for listening to Unpopular Front. Today we have Lindsey Weedston.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. A freelance writer based in Seattle. She writes about feminism, power, and politics. You can find her writing at notsorryfeminism.com. Thanks for joining us, Lindsey.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So before we go into any of some topics and articles that you've written in the past, just tell us a little bit about who you are, sort of what your perspective is, how you got into writing.
I'm a Seattle-based writer. I've been writing for a long time. Probably started getting into writing when I was like 10 or 11. And spent my teen years writing some terrible fiction. And then went to college, got a degree in creative writing at Western Washington University. That was really fun. And then from that, I basically, my first writing job out of college was at this terrible digital marketing company. Just like, oh, gross, just slimy. But, pretty much the only thing I could get at the time, coming straight out of college in the middle of the recession. But so it was there basically, like, I didn't have a lot to do, but also my bosses didn't really understand, I think, writing and how quickly I could do the task they gave me. So I spent a lot of time, online reading news on social media. That was when I got into Tumblr, and Tumblr pretty much led directly to the politics I have now.
Yeah.
I'm a straight Tumblrina. Yeah, that and, a number of blogs, political blogs. I started out reading a lot from Shakesville.
Sure, yeah.
You know that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Too liberal for me now, too, not left enough.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
But got started there. And then also a number of blogs by women of color, especially Trudy and her former blog, Gradient Lair. And now at this point, I'm, very interested in leftist politics. I guess I identify mostly as a leftist, but I'm quite interested in, the very left fields. Been reading on anarcho-communism and mostly just looking for an alternative to capitalism and this structure we have going on that is not working for most people.
No.
But working very well for a few.
A few very rich people, one of who it was working very well for, if you live in the area where we live, recently died, right? Paul Allen.
Yeah, Paul Allen.
Yeah. I just have to say, though, you really came to the right place if you're a, blogger, writer who's becoming more and more leftist. So right there with you. Anarcho-communism. Pretty into it, I must say. So
yeah. Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Peter Kropotkin and
Yeah.
Ursula Le Guin's influences and stuff. So yeah, totally. Very much so. Yeah. I definitely had a similar journey of reading, like, I think when I went, God, this is kind of embarrassing, but my freshman year of college, I had this was in like 2006, I had a subscription to the New Republic. You know?
Yeah.
So I was just like one of those, just like kind of shitty-lived, liberal
totally.
kind of dudes. But I had an anarchist neighbor in the dorms, and he kind of hit me to a few things. And I say I smoked pot, read Chomsky, and took a walk, and I kind of got out of where I was. So
yeah,
I'm right there with you. Speaking of Paul Allen, I'm just curious before we talk about your article on South Park and some of the like alt-right kind of folks. Did you grow up in the Seattle area?
I did. Yeah, born in Renton.
Okay.
Raised and I've never lived in Seattle, but all around.
Sure. All right. I'm technically in South Beacon Hill right now, so
Cool.
You see a guy walking with two babies in a stroller. That's me.
Awesome.
They're not my kids. I'm a nanny, so that's.
Oh yeah, that's right. I read that.
Yeah. I don't know if I could do this podcast. Well, you know what? I'm going to be able to do it when I have kids. That doesn't matter. But I'm curious, growing up in Seattle, sort of, what was your impression of people like Paul Allen? Because I feel like he used his wealth to kind of let himself be known here.
Right.
So sort of what was your relationship to those kinds of, because the Seattle area has a few very prominent, very rich people.
Yeah. Well, Paul Allen wasn't really on my radar until he died. Like, you'd heard of him. People say Paul Allen. You're like, I know who that is, right?
Right.
But yeah. I mean, it was interesting growing up. I actually grew up in with fairly conservative parents.
Mm-hmm.
And, they voted for Republicans, but, we didn't really talk about politics much in my family.
Right.
Very kind of a taboo topic. Until recently. Of course, you can't avoid it, but, but yeah, I mean, you hear about, of course, like Bill Gates and Bill Gates's foundation and other people like him and Paul Allen. And it's, people talk about them like they're just so amazing for donating so much. But at the same time, Bill Gates has this incredible mansion in Bellevue.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, with people have been saying for certain, at least entrepreneurs, they make more money than they could possibly give away. But at the same time, at least with like Bill Gates, I'm looking for jobs recently, and you'll see jobs with Microsoft that are, minimum wage.
Right.
And like, I know they have in the city over in Redmond, they'll have game testers that they're paying to make their Xbox games or test their Xbox games, which is an extremely essential function.
Mm-hmm.
They hire all these poor kids coming out of college doing minimum wage at a job that on the surface, if you don't know anything about it, sounds like, oh, it's just playing video games for money, but it's not.
Oh, no.
Like, I know. I've never done it myself, but I've known people, and they're like, it's so incredibly tedious.
I actually did that job for a few.
Did that?
I did that for about a month. Yeah, it was terrible. This was back when the minimum wage, I think, was like, wasn't even, it was like maybe $9. You didn't have guaranteed shifts. You would just have to show up, and the first, 120 people who signed up, that was who got that shift.
Wow.
So I would have to drive out there, and sometimes I would drive from the U district and all the way to Redmond, and I wouldn't have a shift, and I would just go home.
Wow, that's worse than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, and it was like doing things like, it wasn't even about playing the game. It was like, put the disc in, put it in, and now start it. Now do that again, but holding down the right trigger,
right.
Just over and over, and so rote. And you like couldn't bring in like a phone or even like a Kindle, like it was really boring and terrible. And yeah, that job kind of radicalized me a little bit, because I was just like, Jesus Christ, this is ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah. So you bringing up video games, you've written some about sort of your relationship to the gaming industry and gaming culture, that I found really interesting, because I kind of have a similar relationship, not so much of how it is to be a woman in that space, obviously, but sort of being so turned off by that culture, and then to sort of see like the way that like the Gamergate phenomenon, and then sort of this new like reactionary gaming culture rise, kind of just like made me kind of like tune out of something that I really cared about and did so much with. So sort of what was what are the games maybe where you found certain these moments come up?
Like probably my first experience with online games was one of those really terrible free-to-play MMOs.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Fly for Fun. It was special because you could like get a broomstick and fly around.
Finally.
Yeah, right.
I always wanted to be a witch.
Yeah.
But, games, they never gave you the full, witch experience. So.
No, they really didn't. But, yeah, so the first like character I made in that game was actually it was a male avatar, and I didn't make it because I was afraid of being harassed at the time. I think it was like 13, maybe 12 or 13, but just because I thought it looked cool, and also there was also definitely a component where I could see like, it demoed some of like the female outfits, and they were definitely like ridiculously skimpy. And as you leveled up more, it was like they got less and less armor.
Which is kind of counterproductive to, like, I don't know, like an armor skill.
Right.
When the number goes up, you would expect more things, but...
Right, yeah. And that was, regardless of whether you had like a stealth character or a warrior. Like,
right.
If you were a stealth character, you got a leather bikini. If you were a warrior, you got a metal bikini. That was the difference. But yeah, so anyway, I made the male avatar because, I wanted decent clothing and like cool short purple hair. And I ended up befriending this person, this other player who's actually a guy, and I just didn't really mention that I was a woman. It never came up. It was never like, what gender are you? Mm-hmm. He just assumed I was a guy, and I kind of like figured he assumed I was a guy, but I don't know. It was just this weird kind of thing that went on for a while. And then finally it did come up that I was a woman, and he could not handle it. Like he was just shocked. Like
That's
sometimes
nuts.
I think about it like, did I like completely destroy his worldview?
Yeah, he was like, this is my no lady time.
I know.
Get away from me, Mom.
Yeah. And after that, he was totally, he was weird to me. We like fell out,
Right, yeah.
And I was, it was kind of sad. And I was like, what the heck? Like nothing's different.
Right.
And yeah, that was kind of my first experience. And yeah, since then it's been kind of this, I don't play a ton of online games, but I have played like World of Warcraft for a while, and then like the Elder Scrolls Online. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of sketchy trying to navigate it as a woman. Like, I actually got into World of Warcraft because for a college course, it was a requirement. It was actually a woman in video games English class.
Oh, cool.
Which was the best class ever.
That sounds pretty interesting. Was there like a whole section on like Zelda, like just the one character? Or like
no. Yeah. We did a lot more talking about like online games and
that makes
and
a lot
the
more sense actually.
There.
Right.
Yeah. But so that was when I discovered that there's a whole sex worker economy in World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And there's a town called Goldshire, which everybody called Pornshire. And that was really interesting. I actually wrote a paper on it. And but it was also like, I made a what was it? It was one of the very small races.
Right.
Like not even a dwarf, I don't think.
Like a gnome or something.
Yeah, like
I
a gnome.
definitely fucked with some WoW, so I could tell you a lot. Yeah.
I think it was a gnome, and it was a female gnome, and I went to Goldshire just to check it out.
Yeah.
And it got the one like tavern, and they've got female avatars dancing, and I had a guy proposition me.
What?
Yeah, on chat, and I'm like, I'm like, wow, okay, even a gnome? And he replied with that. I remember this distinctly. He replied, "A mouth is a mouth."
Ugh. God, that's like some just weird. Oh, that weird bro shit. That's just so fascinating to me. How like, with these like video games and especially like MMOs and like very social online games, like there was always this like sense that like we can create a new world, like like people can be different, they can present themselves in a way that maybe they see themselves more as, or to live like a power fantasy, but still the same bullshit as would happen if you like went to a fucking bar on the weekend.
Right.
It's going to happen in just some fantasy tavern, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And it makes me wonder if that guy was thinking, like, does he think he's a champion for equality? Because
right. Exactly.
You get a blowjob even from a representation of a little person.
Right. You know, I mean, representation matters in all forms, I guess, including really disgusting digi creeps. I don't know how else to describe it, but
right. Yeah, that's a good.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I always sort of I think it's like the only online game I play now is a game where there is no voice chat and there's no even text chat. And all you have is just 6 options. It's Hearthstone, which is like the World of Warcraft spinoff game.
Yeah.
And so you never have to hear that. And it's so nice, but it also is like a reminder that like it kind of limits the potential of what can happen in these kinds of, you know, like what communities could be built, sort of what different kinds of experiences you could have with the game. But because of these toxic cultures, it's still preferable to just like not hear anyone ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. Like my most recent experience with this was for a while I was really into Overwatch. And I actually, you know, I dusted off my headset for this podcast, but I actually bought it for Overwatch because I was getting really into it. I wanted to be able to communicate better with other players. But I ended up, for the most part, being afraid to use it.
Right.
Because I was seriously just afraid that they would hear my voice, they would code it as female, and dudes would harass me. But you know, it's kind of funny because, you know, they'll find, you know, predatory men will find a way. Like, there were multiple instances where, you know, I didn't have my headset on, and, you know, I had turned all the, you know, voice chat off. But, like, if I was playing Mercy, especially, the healer, I would get a lot of guys coming up to me and, you know, crouching and uncrouching right next to me.
Jesus.
And it's like, it took me a bit to figure it out, but then I was like, oh god, they're trying to hump me, aren't they?
Yes.
They're trying to virtue hump me.
Sure, why not? Yeah, that makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. So I took to, you know, anytime that would happen, because it would usually happen in, like, the beginning, the staging area before the game actually starts, and you could switch your character. I just switched to, like, what was it, the big giant guy?
What's
like,
there's
all of a sudden,
the gorilla guy? Winston?
No, not Winston.
Oh my gosh, I played Overwatch a ton for about a year, so this is kind of embarrassing. But
right, no, you know, the tank with the
big hammer, Reinhorn.
No, the Junkrat.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, gosh, this is embarrassing. Well,
right.
I guess I'm some people say I'm not a real leftist. Some people say now I'm not a real gamer. I don't know what I have anymore.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you ruined it. Oh, Roadhog. That was
Roadhog. There you go. Yeah.
Switch to Roadhog. And it's like, oh, I bet you won't want to hump this. Not to, like, fat shame Roadhog, but
yeah, there you go.
Just, you know,
right.
You know they're going to be like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's their whole. They have this, like, idealized idea of, oh, it's so fucked up. That's so annoying. Yeah. God damn it. That stuff sucks. Which kind of reminds me of, I mean, that kind of humor is very much, you know, that sort of, you can see how someone can go from, like, that gaming world to then become, like, a South Park conservative.
Yeah.
Which has kind of been a pipeline, at least online, it seems, for at least our lives,
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, because you wrote a pretty long piece in the Establishment about sort of how the South Park conservative sort of became the alt-right, and sort of how that's a part of this sort of nativist, racist, anti-feminist kind of movement that's kind of the young right now.
Yeah.
So, if you could just talk some about that and kind of, yeah.
Yeah. That was a really interesting piece to do. And, I still think about this concept all the time. But it definitely came about, that piece was inspired just by me desperately trying to figure out what is going on, just in general. Like, how did any of this happen? So it actually started out, I pitched it as the history of celebrated assholes.
Right.
And I went back, just kind of scouring the history of comedy all the way back to like the ancient Greek satire plays, that were like, they're basically politically sanctioned. Like, satirists would be hired by one political party to like mock the other in these public displays. And and then up to like jesters who were, they were like hired to dance this weird line between, mocking the ruler, but not enough to get, their heads cut off. And then up to like modern shock jocks and like 1970s comedy. And it was really interesting to find out that, like in the 1970s, during the time of George Carlin's famous 7 words you can't say on TV, the original monologue, you could actually be arrested. I wouldn't have thought, at least that recently, that you could be arrested for saying dirty words in public.
Oh, yeah.
It was, yeah. And the original article also had a really interesting bit about the original, one of the original shock jocks, possibly the original shock jock, was actually a black man. Let me see if I can, because I always forget about it. It was Petey Green was his name.
Right.
And he started his career in 1966 after he was actually in prison for a time, and the prison guards would like let him go over the intercom and just talk because they thought he was so funny.
Right.
And then from there he got a job in broadcasting, and on his first broadcast, the studio wanted to fire him. They were like,
Yeah.
Okay, this was a mistake. They were like going to go fire him.
Right.
But then the switchboard lit up, like they had more calls from listeners than they'd ever had before. And they were like, oh, wait.
Right.
Maybe not. And they didn't fire him. They kept him on.
Yes.
But yeah, Petey Green, he was just this, kind of, he didn't have a public education. He was another black man at the time, lost in the system, who just came up, and he would just speak his mind. And, but unlike, maybe Howard Stern, he actually did spend a lot of time supporting important causes, like, talking about poverty and education in black communities. And he was actually credited for helping to, calm down the riots after, I believe, the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination.
Yeah.
Which was really interesting. And so, yeah, it was great to learn about this guy, P.D. Green, especially. He was, like, I had never heard of him before, but such an interesting figure. And actually, Howard Stern had P.D. Green on one of his shows and lists him as an inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah, did you ever see the movie about P.D. Green?
No.
It's called yeah, it's actually pretty good. It's pretty good, you know. I don't think it's totally accurate. It stars Don Cheadle and has Taraji P. Henson in it. It's pretty good. Mm-hmm. It's Talk to Me, but yeah, like the climax of that movie is like the, you know, reaction of Washington D.C. after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and it's pretty powerful, you know, like it shows the power of that one can have using comedy to like get attention, and you know how that built community and that allowed him to sort of help soothe this pain. You know, it was kind of beautiful.
Yeah,
you know, and it's interesting that you bring up you know, how the shock jock kind of changes, right? Because someone like P.D. Green has such a different relationship to power than someone like the, you know, South Park guys.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, P.D. Green grew up in poverty.
Exactly.
And, you know, obviously he was a black man, so he had a lot of personal experience. He knew people personally who were affected by these issues. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, I don't know all of Howard Stern's friends, but he doesn't engage a whole lot in, I don't think, philanthropy. And, you know, at least not on his shows. He seems mostly dedicated to just shocking people.
Dude is
kind of being a dick.
Right, just like being a dick for capitalism, you know, just to get that money. Yeah, exactly. So you, in the article on South Park, you compare sort of what happened with South Park and a large section of their audience politically with the 1987 film Wall Street. And I thought that was a good metaphor and a good comparison. You know, how greed is good was supposed to mean that greed is actually bad because you're not supposed to like this character, but how sometimes with satire and irony, some people see almost too much of themselves and then they get caught up in it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, Wall Street is a really good example of a good intent really gone wrong.
Yeah.
I feel really bad for Oliver Stone. Poor guy. I didn't even know before researching for this article that he was like a hard liberal who hated Ronald Reagan.
Oh yeah.
And he was really, really against what, you know, was depicted in Wall Street. But I think people see what they want to see. Right. You know, so if somebody watches this and, you know, they want to be greedy and they just want money and they want an excuse to do whatever, you know, roll over whoever to get it, then that's what they'll see. Mm-hmm. And they'll ignore the irony willfully or subconsciously.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible how they took that tagline, greed is good, which was supposed to be like, it was supposed to be an example of these kind of people are terrible.
Right.
And people took that and were like, just took it as face value. Like, okay, greed is good.
The end. Yeah.
Let's go capitalism.
Right. Exactly. Like, well, I guess it means everything's perfect. I guess we just got to keep it going. Yeah, I know. It is crazy to think that someone could watch that and not hate it. But kind of a similar thing happened, although maybe this is the difference between these two movies, but with like The Wolf of Wall Street. Like when I saw that movie, I hated that guy, but everyone else was just like, he's just, living that dream. And it's like that. So it's just a continuation of that like male power fantasy. And it's so fucking disgusting. And you see that in South Park all the time with sort of how, I even remember growing up, because I'm Jewish, and so much of that show, it's a running thing that I feel like is not very common, especially in the media of the time when South Park first came out, of like ironic anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. It was not a thing I dealt with at all in my life until South Park. And, I think I probably played into it a little bit because it was hard to offend me about that. But then I realized how for a lot of people, maybe they have a different relationship to their identity, and how in some ways, especially for people who are kind of young and not very grown up, how easy it is to just sort of go from, making fun of Jews being greedy to then just thinking Jews are greedy, and then thinking the Jewish cabal controls everything, and like how that pipeline works. Yeah,
and I think it also has the effect of emboldening true anti-Semites. And I think that's like those two things combined has grown into what we see today. Like, South Park, Matt and Trey, they can say that the anti-Semitism is ironic, and sure, I'm sure they did intend it as such, but you can't ignore the reality that you've gone from kids being like, oh, Jews, to
Jews will not replace us, like the tiki
exactly.
torch fuckers,
Yeah. Like, but to Matt and Trey, they're not about to apologize for what they've done or speak out against actual anti-Semitism. Right. Because, that would be antithetical to kind of the movement that they've created. Mm-hmm. I can imagine, even if Matt and Trey Parker, if they actually, came out and were like, hey, like, don't be anti-Semitic, don't use these slurs, their own fans would like cannibalize them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. They would be so angry that they would even say that.
It would sort of kill it would like kill the engine that keeps the show going,
Right. Yeah.
And, it's so, you talk a lot in the article kind of about how, like, there was a period of time, I guess you could sort of call it I guess we're still kind of in it, but it's funny to me how it maybe sort of coincides with the, like, neoliberal era of the rise of these sort of asshole comics and the sort of, like, glorifying being an asshole sort of during the 80s and 90s. And, how that, how sort of as like the economy and the rest of society is becoming more dog eat dog, more competitive, more of an emphasis on greed, as sort of like social contracts are being broken down, even sort of the thing that we care the most about and the thing that we find the greatest relief is becoming meaner and meaner, sort of just for the sake of it. And, it's, I'm trying to find, there's something, sorry. Yeah. And how, you talk about like this idea of kind core, which I find cute and fun. And I don't know if I'm exactly a part of it, Because I definitely, because like it's hard because like I still can mess around with some irony, and like I don't want to, because like I'm conflicted personally sometimes because I know when I'm with my wife and we're just joking around, I'll probably make a like silly joke about like being paid off by George Soros, or
Yeah.
I'll just call my like my great uncle who has all the like diamonds down in the mines, but like it's funny, but it's also like it can play into these certain things. And I know she's kind of a controversial writer, and I'm not really sure if I totally agree with all of her points in her book, but Angela Nagel has this book, Kill All Normies. And the one thing that I noticed that both your South Park article and she writes about sort of the rise of the alt-right, how we sort of, in some of these cultural spaces, as they became more political, you realized how much there was like a fetishization just of breaking the rules. Sort of, it doesn't matter why you're breaking the rules or sort of what sort of is the relationship of power. It's just, oh, you're a rebel because you're transgressive. And just how easy it is to go from being transgressive to being a Nazi. So I guess,
Right.
What are your thoughts on the last week with sort of what's been going on with like the Proud Boys and these sort of brown shirts or Fred Perry khaki dudes who are going around?
Yeah.
It's pretty, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been kind of trying to wrap my head around this. I mean, I was aware of the Proud Boys prior, of course they have a presence around the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
But yeah, this new violence, and at the same time, I think on Monday the Portland police released some information that they had kept quiet since like August 4th of this year, that during one of the like Patriot Prayer rallies, they had found and quote redirected a group of guys associated with Patriot Prayer who had a cache of guns on like the roof of a parking structure that was like above the rally or along the march route, and they would just like move along, and then they did not release that information into the public until just now. It's like, holy crap. Yeah, it's frightening. But yeah, in my case, I still feel like I'm constantly desperately trying to wrap my head around this culture that creates the kind of people that are in the Proud Boys and in Patriot Prayer, and trying to even like read their statements or listen to them talk. It's almost like they exist in a constant like state of pseudo reality. Like they there's the concept of Schrodinger's douchebag.
Yes.
Where you are you're joking about everything you're saying until you're not.
Right.
Like there's some you say something racist, and if people react negatively, you were joking. If they react positively, you were not. And it seems like they operate on that, and combined with this weird, bizarre kind of right-wing meme culture, in which like everything is a joke just until it isn't.
Right.
Like a huge part of the so-called alt-right and general white supremacist movement in America is based on this very strange humor that just kind of is so twisty and turny. It's impossible to really get your head around it. And it's like, you can't argue with these guys because it's either you don't get our weird, simultaneously racist and non-racist humor.
Right. Yeah, it's
And
both,
so
right? Duh.
You're yeah, right. Like, so you're just a normie who doesn't get it.
Right.
And it's just so bizarre, but also, it's just terrifying because now you have a very violent brown shirt-esque group
Yeah.
going around and actually beating people.
Literally.
And it's like, at what point does this stop being funny to you?
Right. Yeah, like how many levels of irony do you have to be on to commit a felony?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure to them it's always justified because they can, someone reaches out to kind of try to snatch their MAGA hat, and that's justification for a beating.
Exactly.
And, and it has seemed very much like the police are on their side on that.
Oh, yeah.
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 I mean, the NYPD now says they're going to arrest 9 guys or are looking to charge 9 guys who were involved in the beatings, but I've also heard witnesses say that the police were there, like they had a police escort in New York.
Yep.
The groups of Proud Boys, and it's like, what were they doing? Why didn't they stop these Proud Boys from ganging up and beating the shit out of some random guy who tried to take a hat?
Right. Like, take the hat back then, if that's what you're so pissed off about, and it's
right.
It's just like an obvious. Yeah, they are just like they need to enact violence for some reason, almost like beyond, because it's not even like the guy who they beat up was really like a political power player, or like was he even like a leftist or a liberal necessarily? Like, just didn't like their hat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know anything about any of their victims.
Yeah.
But yeah. And yeah, it's actually, I've read that it's actually in their bylaws that it's very much like a street game, like a street gang. They have to beat someone up to be officially in.
Right. Yeah.
It's completely. Sorry.
No,
it's
go
completely
on.
It's completely based on violence and toxic masculinity. The Proud Boys they're pretty much the embodiment of pure toxic masculinity.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's even attracted some young men of color. Even though, they're clearly a racist organization and associate with racist organizations, but
right.
I read an article recently about this phenomenon of young men of color joining the Proud Boys, even though it seemed to be against their interests. And I think, toxic masculinity can be a really powerful motivator.
Yeah, you even kind of see that in other very the sort of mass masculinist movements, like, in the incel community, there's like a racial pecking order that sort of gives an in for young Asian men of color, or
right.
Just all different groups, and how, it shows sort of how these different systems can, bring in people from all these different ways, and how they can build this sort of reactionary coalition. Yeah, I had a queer friend who was texting me this week about, they were confused with the Proud Boys, how they were, not anti-gay, but also had, these really sort of traditionalist views about women, and they have this idea of the trad wife, and they worship, like a sort of mommy, like a sort of Madonna mommy figure of femininity,
right.
But then they're so violently against sort of any kind of feminism, or things that probably we wouldn't even consider to be that feminist, they probably would still be pissed off about,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah. Go.
and they can say they're anti-gay, but they were also shouting like homophobic slurs as they're
Exactly.
beating up people. Like,
Yeah. Like, come on. What else does that mean? You're not calling them a bundle of sticks, okay?
yeah,
I don't
right,
really. I
yeah,
mean, I know we're like, we're all anti-smoking now, but calling someone a cigarette isn't that insulting. So we know what you're doing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy group, and that Gavin Guinness it's interesting to sort of put him into the context of the South Park guys and that sort of
yeah,
line, because he himself is very much of that sort of he sort of presents himself as like a punk rock kind of hipster guy, but he's just being ironic, right? But like a lot of the
right,
times, like those sort of dudes, they're being ironic in that like they'll act like they like the Eagles, or they're being ironic in that they'll drink shitty beer because it's funny. Not they're being ironic in that like all women need to be like forced in like the Handmaid's Tale. That's sort of a different
yeah,
level. And I know he and I'm going to try to put this in at the end of this. There's a video by Berger, it went through a lot of Gavin Guinness and sort of how he basically what he says on his shows is like that we need more violence, we need more fighting. It's this very sort of traditionalist view that we just need more physical conflict. And I just can't help but sort of feel like it's either the right sort of showing their real face of sort of how far back they want to take us, or if it's just sort of them giving up on politics and just going straight to violence. And I don't really know where they're going to end up, but I know we need to be careful and protect people who if they are in a situation with one of these people.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the Proud Boys and Gavin McInnes, they'll take the violence as far as they can get away with it. I mean, I think a lot of these guys also they revere societies, that they perceived as being violent. Especially, I know there's a lot of comparing themselves to like the Vikings,
Right.
who are ironically, a rather egalitarian society in terms of gender, at least.
Yeah, very much so, actually.
Yeah. And things like that, and it's really, it's really just all using history for their own means and ignoring what isn't convenient.
Yeah,
but they idealize a view of society